Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 227th edition. Wow, of the Frank and Stan chat. And for those of you watching on video, you'll notice that we have a guest with us. It's Pie Corbett. Hello, Pie.
Hi there, everybody. Really nice to be with you both for some time together to chat through some of the things we're really enthusiastic about and passionate about in education. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, we've had a great chat already, to be honest. We always say it's a shame we can't capture all these sorts of chats beforehand.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's great to have you. And Stan, welcome back.
Yeah, a week in Spain.
Yeah, and I had to run this last week on my own, but it wasn't quite the same. But I'm glad to see you there, Stan. So
Probably better.
Estepona or somewhere.
Yeah, to be honest, it was probably better.
It, I had to do a cover on my own. That was the thing, the
Oh,
cover sheet and everything. Well, anyway, okay. The weather's well. We're in the middle of June here. The weather's gorgeous in Manchester, and it's probably warm in Birmingham today as well, isn't it, Pie?
Very hot.
Very
Yes,
hot. Yeah.
very hot. But I'm in the Holiday Inn. I'm loving it.
Right, Stan. What's caught your eye this week?
Well, while I've been away in glorious Spain, I've just been doing a bit of reading and stuff on the iPad. And what's come up quite often is a guy called Mark Crossley, who was a goalkeeper who played for under Brian Clough. And he has some very, very funny stories about Brian Clough and stories that are almost like, surely that never happened. But what comes across, if you watch enough of them, is his great admiration for Brian Clough and the fact that he talks about his leadership and his leadership of people and the way he managed players in the club and how he brought people down a peg or two if they got above the station. Those stories are quite good. But he also talked about him being a very simple leader in that he simplified things for the players. And one of his quotes is something like, "Players win games, tactics don't." So it's the players that are the important part. So he never talked tactics. He also said he never talked about the opposition. He just talked about players and what they could do and what he wanted them to do. And he swore at them a lot and he gave them horrible names and he was quite sharp with them. But it comes across that he could manage people. And it made me remember doing leadership courses in the past where we referenced managers, football managers particularly, like Alex Ferguson, for their management style. Jose Mourinho was another one that we used to use as an example. And then I thought, I'm not sure we've still got that style of manager who can talk about the way they manage people and the way they see leadership and the way they see life. We don't seem to get, whether I'm just too old now and the football's, the results are more important than anything else. But I suppose the most recent one who offered a philosophy at times was Jurgen Klopp. And it's not easy for me to say that. But I just wonder, is that because of foreign influence on management? Because there aren't that many British managers. And do they no longer talk about where they've come from, what they believe in?
Well, I have a view on this. I'm going to bring it into education now. Is that nowadays, in order to be a manager, you need to have a level 3 UEFA coaching award. And part of that is around leadership. So it's not just, oh, here are some training sessions that you can do. It's the whole gamut of stuff. And in a way, there's a risk here, isn't there, in any training program that is trying to force people to be certain types of leaders, And in a way, we've argued before, Stan, about national professional qualifications for leaders in education run a risk of creating very similar types of leaders, And I think in a way, those previous managers, who weren't coming through the system of having to get a level 3, whatever it is, UA for coaching badge, that they actually had time to actually work out what type of leader do I want to be, rather than the type of leader that UEFA thinks I ought to be. So I think there may be something in there.
I think there's a lot of truth in that, Frank, and I'll link that now to what I read just recently about, I think, the advice going to the Secretary of State. There's been a selection, hasn't there, of a number of people. And I thought, well, they are all from multi-academy trusts. That's likely. And I thought, well, why have they been picked? Because they are winners in this system that we have. They've got to the top of the system as it stands. Now, if you only take advice from the ones who've got to the system as it stands, you're only going to replicate the system, aren't you? It's not going to change. It's like history is written by the winners.
Yes.
I do think there's an element of saying we're bound to just carry on along the way we're going if we don't find some breakaway group or somebody who can speak and understand, a Ken Robinson, let's say again, who can challenge the way we do things, because I just worry about where this will all end up.
Pie, what do you think?
We've just been looking at leadership. We've one of the things we do in Talk for Writing is we put money into research projects. When I say research, we're not researchers, but we're in the middle of looking at schools that our training centres. We've got about 20 in all. We've got about 26 schools, which are either what we call a training centre or a showcase school. The training centres have been doing it. The longest is 20 years. So that's Penwood in Slough, and that's very sophisticated. And then we got, so that tier is, they're all outstanding schools, genuinely. But when you go and visit somewhere that's truly outstanding, if you're trying to develop things, it's nice to go and get a vision.
Yes.
But very often it's so sophisticated, you think, what can I do? And to go back to football.
Well, it doesn't look as though they know what it is. It works so smoothly.
Yes,
and it's difficult to unpick what is making it all work so
and how
smoothly.
did you get there? And you've taken on a rough school, let's say, that's all over the place, and you don't know where to start. But at least you've got a sense of, maybe I'd like to have a school a bit like that. And I think that's important. The other schools we have are called showcase schools. Now, those are ones that have only done it for 2 or 3 years. And in some ways, they're more interesting because if you're starting out to do school improvement, you can go to a showcase school and they will be able to talk about where they're going next, how they got to this particular place, etc. Anyway, what we've done is we've been visiting schools and talking with the leaders who are serving very, very challenging areas, and despite the odds, are getting surprisingly high standards. So Briar Hill in Northampton, for instance, they get around 90% in year 6 SATs. Well, how the heck do they do that, given the area they're serving? Well, when you go and when you talk to the leaders, it's the clarity. They have absolute clarity, a complete passion and dedication to that simple idea that what we're here to do is to transform their lives. That's the job, and that they're human, and everybody can learn, everybody can move forwards. And actually, it doesn't matter where they come from. They come in the door, and from then on, for the next 7 years or whatever it is, that's our responsibility. And the aim is to get 100% reading and writing, maths, and being nice people, etc. So they've got this absolute determination. And over the years, because they've stuck with the other big thing that they don't do is they stick with a few things and get good at them. So they're not constantly looking for the next brand new shiny thing that's going to solve all our problems. So nobody ever gets any good at anything. So Penwood 98% EAL. Well, there's some advantages there, of course, but their big challenge is mobility, massive mobility. But because they've been doing talk for writing, for instance, and they've had the same phonic program as well for 20 years, they got rather good at it. And they've got a very, very well defined curriculum, extremely well resourced, so that the teachers are not spending time on constantly planning at the weekend, because the plans are all done. It's all done, and they know the units really, really well. Obviously, they refine, tweak, embellish, so it's a living, breathing thing. But they're not doing this thing that so many teachers do, where there are teachers out there who, for 35 years, have planned the whole curriculum every year. It's a form of insanity.
Yes.
If the highwayman works for you in year 5, keep doing it,
Yes.
because it's a great thing and you'll know what you're doing. So they've sorted that. The other big thing that the great leaders have done is, so the planning is really well defined and resourced, etc. Then the other thing is that where there is behavior that is interruptive, they have got, and all the schools do the same thing. They have 2 or 3 people who are on hand, who, if a child is really struggling, they come out of the classroom, spend some time with them, and then eventually, when they're ready, they go back in. So the teachers are not interrupted in their teaching. All of the ones that we've looked at have also had to create special little units, totally unfunded. Everyone's having to do that now, where children who struggle or need a one-to-one or small group work can go. So they've all got that go. So the behavior is immaculate. Like the school I'm going to talk about later on, the behavior is superb. Really great focus on the learning. The curriculum is very well resourced and supported, etc. And they get good CPD constantly tied into the curriculum. So they're getting better and better subject knowledge and teaching skill. They're supported as teachers through coaching. So if you're not too strong at maths, somebody's going to help you with that. And the other big thing is that they've got effective routines for marking. So most of the marking is done live. You know that thing, I used to do this when I started donkeys years ago, running around the room like a man, marking over the shoulder. So most of it is done live, which releases that burden a bit from the
and the thinking time, the reflection time, which you don't get, do you, when you're grabbing 30 books to take home and mark that evening, you know? I mean, Pie, one thing I was guilty of is not allowing you to just tell everybody who you are.
Yeah, my wife tells me off. She says, you assume everyone knows you.
Well, actually, I feel as I've never met Pie in my life, but he has been a constant name throughout my teaching career. And I started teaching in 1979. Pie told us before, I think your first book came out in 1983.
I think it was 83, yes.
So who is Pie Corbett? Why does Frank know him so well, even though he's never met him before?
Well, this is a lovely thing. If you write, so I've written a lot of articles, and if you write or you do what I do, in a weird way, I've had people come up to me and say, I've been reading your books for 25 years and I feel as if I know you. And in a weird way, you do. And of course, the other big thing is basically what I say has not changed. I believe in the power of the imagination. I believe in language as a revolutionary, liberating force. I believe that all children can learn, they can all move forwards. I believe the job of school is to liberate children so that they have the language and the skills that they need and the attitudes to take their place in society, etc. Now, none of that has changed. I've been saying the same thing for, it's going on 50 years now. None of that's changed, and it never will change. And also, how you teach is how you teach, and how you teach writing, that's not really changed. How you teach reading hasn't really changed. We know a bit more.
Yes.
But weirdly, despite all that's happened with people inspecting schools, that's been going on, what, 25 years, is it? Something like
1992 it started.
Was it really?
Well, that's when Ofsted was created. There were
Yeah.
inspections before that, but you very rarely saw an HMI from one decade to the next.
Well, the HMI, of course, are a different, well, they were
Yeah.
a different thing. I remember
Yes.
when I did some additional inspector work, which was an important part, really. I felt that if people were going to inspect, somebody like me should inspect, because I like to think I came to it with some humanity and humility for what people were trying to do. So, yeah, I've lost my thread now. What was I rambling on
No,
about?
It's the difference between HMI and
Yeah, that's it. I remember saying to, you had to have you. We all had an HMI mentor,
yeah.
yes.
and I remember her saying, I mentioned Ofsted. She said, "I do not work for Ofsted. I work for Her Majesty and report without fear or favour." I sort of quaked in my boots as this wonderful woman I learned so much from. So, but it is surprising how we know so much now, and these schools I've been talking about. Um, we know so much about leadership and what it looks like. And all the leaders that we've been talking to who have grown these wonderful schools that are so effective in these challenging areas, they're all different people, obviously, they're different personalities, but there are certain things that you can pick out. For instance, that absolute commitment
Yeah.
that their job is to get these kids reading, writing, being good citizens, etc. They are utterly determined that their children are as good as kids. They used to have this entire hamlets, that sense of, yeah, we recognize poor backgrounds, many of these children, a bit tricky, but our kids are as good as kids anywhere else,
Yeah.
and our job is to get them there. And they had that. So all these leaders, they have this absolute passion. So there are certain sort of common traits, but it does surprise me that we're still, I would say that the Ofsted thing isn't working terribly well, because I still go into schools, and you will have seen them and heard about them, etc., where it is woeful. And you
Mm,
think, well, how did that happen? How can a school be so woeful when we know, basically, I think we know how to teach almost every kid to read, to write to a proficient level and enjoy it, and do maths and science. And this is all known. When we started out, nobody knew anything.
no.
I did 4 years training, and the first thing I was given was a big book with two coloured biros. And this kid said, "This is the register." And I said, "What do you do?" And he said, "I don't know what you do, but you better do it right, because Mrs. Bullen will get you." Terrified of the woman in the office.
Well,
Mrs.
I
Bullen.
remember though, Pi, in my year six, I had 46 children in year six in my first year,
Yeah.
and I was handed the mainline book four. And the mainline book four, for those who don't know, is the English book that was used. So for junior four, I had book four. And in that book, I learnt what a preposition was. I'd never ever come across a preposition in my entire life until I had to teach it. Now, I'm not suggesting that what the government's doing with regard to its focus on grammar and all that sort of stuff is right, but it certainly is wrong that I got to the point of being able to stand in front of a group of children without knowing what a preposition was. So in effect, whenever there is gaps like this in provision, it's easy pickings for a government to drive horse and coaches through it. And I think there's something here about the profession as in that time, and probably still today, is not clear enough about what how we do these things, and actually. I left, and I think Stan was the same. I left becoming ahead when the National Literacy Strategy arrived. There was, I mean, I'm not bragging, but I tell you what, the standards in English were very, very high in our school. And this was making it harder, not making it better. It might have helped those schools that didn't know how to do it, but we knew how to do it. But we were all forced to do it that way. And that's what happens when I think the profession can't pull itself together and do some of this sharing and learning together to ensure that we don't have these massive gaps in some provision. But Pi, let me get on to you've had an interesting day today, haven't you? You've had an
Well,
uplifting day.
it was actually yes. What
Oh,
day?
yesterday.
Wednesday.
Wednesday, yeah.
I was playing. Yeah, it's Wednesday. No, it's Monday. So
Oh, right.
I'm in Birmingham. I'm in Birmingham for 4 days. So on Monday, I decided I would go and visit two schools, who these are teachers I've known who are fantastic teachers, and Daniel is he's now deputy head, and Tracy in the afternoon she's now head. Tracy's school is in Sparkbrook, and Daniel's school is in Handsworth. Now, Handsworth, we know from the awful days when there were riots on the streets and the police were very brutal and didn't understand the community, etc. So that was what, back in the 60s, 70s?
Yes, and I remember the Sparkbrook being a focus for some work I was doing on my history degree. So, I know those areas quite well, really.
Yeah. It was interesting, Frank, because at Sparkbrook, I wish I'd taken a photograph of it. Literally where the gates were, just outside, you've got rubbish everywhere. And the head was saying that the kids go and watch the rats running around. And around the corner, there's a pile of about 60 black sacks. You think, what is, anyway.
Yes.
Both, I think Tracy's been 2 years there. I think Daniel in his school in Handsworth has been 3 years. And it was lovely to go and see people who I've known as teachers in our talk writing training centres, now in senior positions in a school. Daniel's was in, I think it was in requires improvement, and he joined the school with Phil, the head, as I say, about 2.5 years ago, probably. And they've just been inspected. Now, you and I take all of this with a deep pinch of salt, because I've seen schools that are fantastic told that they aren't, and more annoyingly, or as annoying, schools that you wouldn't send a dog to told that they're outstanding. And I don't trust the whole thing, but to come off that,
yes,
in this instance, when they were inspected recently, they got outstanding. So I go in to think, right, I'm really looking forward to seeing Daniel strut his stuff. I go in, and it's a school that sits in Handsworth. It's an area of great poverty and everything that goes with it. And it was just lovely to see him happy, staff happy, kids happy. First port of call, if they're not happy in school, if teachers are overly stressed, and the head is overly stressed, and you can almost tell it, can't you, from the moment you go into the reception, how he's treated.
We know that, don't we, Stan?
And we were greeted by a lovely lady who I've never seen before, but she seemed to be ready for me and know my name, and you would be very welcoming, and that was lovely. And then Dan appeared, and when he met the kids in the corridor, he had a word for everybody, a kindly word for everybody. Morning, Kabir. Good to see you. How was yesterday's football? He knows the kids. He speaks to everybody. He's got a touch of formality about him, which is required, I think, and but such a warm-hearted, genuine approach to the children. And he might say, "Oh, I'm so glad, the football went for you well last week. Can you tuck your shirt in for me, please?"
Yes.
So he's on it. In terms of, schools you go to where you pass the coat rack and all the coats are on the floor. This always worries me. You think, nobody's on it.
Yes.
Somebody should be double checking that and getting them hung up. And you pay attention to those little details, it can have a good effect, in my view. Anyway, so we walked around, we watched teaching in every class, and it was just a joy to see children from a community that has been disenfranchised for many years, a lot of children who face challenges in their lives, loved, cared for, and my goodness, the vigor in the teaching. That year 5, year 6, we saw some reading going on. They got high quality text. The children, the behaviour for learning was immaculate across the school. Absolutely, a dream to see. All the teachers could teach, because they weren't hung up with constantly firefighting behaviour in the classroom. So everybody was teaching, they were really on it. And it was just lovely to see him. He'd moved in, he's done some great work. One of the interesting things that he's done, and Phil the head, they produce booklets. Now, you probably see this in secondary as well. but they've produced a booklet for every, and I looked through the RE booklet and I looked through the geography. Geography, my teaching of geography was useless. I never really understood. I hated it. We had a man called Mr. Wood at secondary. I loathed him. He used to punch you in the back. He'd come up behind you and say, "Silly boy." I loathed him. He threw my rucksack thing out the window once with all my books. And, "Get out of my room, you silly." I loathed him. Anyway, my teaching of geography was diabolical. And I looked at these booklets, and they've done one for Cross Key Stage 2, one for each subject. And it's a labour of love, really. They've refined them each year. But if you're a teacher and you haven't got the subject knowledge and the resources, etc., I thought, oh, I could probably do a reasonable job at geography because you provided me with this extra support. And I thought that was, part of me doesn't like the idea of booklets. I'd like every teacher to have the subject knowledge, but that's a bit cloud cuckoo land, isn't it? So I thought, well, the teachers must have loved them. And one of the teachers said to me, when Phil and Dan came, they said, this is what we're doing. We're going to stop everybody doing their own thing because it's not working. And we're all going to do this and we're all going to help each other. So they've been working 2-3 years on this and they've grown a lovely school, fantastic school. And it was because
what's the name of it, Pie?
St. Michael's.
St. Michael's.
Michael's and Handsworth. Most of our time, and certainly your time I spent a lot of time working with schools that are struggling.
Yes.
And you can get a skewed view of our education system. It's worth visiting every now and then.
No, I agree.
To great schools and reminding yourselves there are really gifted teachers out, really talented people, great leaders who are transforming the lives of children in ways that when you see a great school, it's way beyond anything that I ever did. It's so sophisticated across the curriculum and it just keeps me going. I mean, I should be doing what you're doing, which is, I don't know what you're doing.
No,
I can't leave it.
All I'm doing at the moment is writing letters to Secretary of State moaning about various things. But I think the thing for me is, you're right. I mean, I'm a trustee of a small trust in East Manchester. And often, you know, I do like going to visit these places because as a trustee, you can get very hung up on sort of finance issues and what have you, all the problems that there are. But just spending half a day just walking around does make you feel, life's not too bad, is it? Not too bad.
Yeah.
What I want to do is, if I can just bring this to a close by, it's World Teacher Day today. And so it made me reflect on a teacher who had quite a profound impact on me, and it was a history teacher. And I went to a secondary modern school in Southend. I didn't pass my 11 plus, so being of a Catholic family, we had to travel 16 miles to get to the local Catholic school, which was 3 buses, which meant that we had to leave home at 10 to 7 in the morning. And that always meant that since then I've always been on time, tried to be on time, even though I was 1 minute late for this meeting. But actually I try and be on time. But actually at that school, there was a grammar school opposite Westcliff High School for boys, a sort of high attaining, still very high attaining school, grammar school. And a young teacher, or a young adult came over when I was in year 9 and taught us history. And this guy was Dave Milne. And Dave did that for a year. He wasn't qualified. He'd just done his A-levels. And he came over to give it a go, to see whether or not he fancied teaching as a career. So he spent the year with us. And what he didn't know about history, gosh, I mean, it highlighted, on reflection, it highlighted for me how little some of the other teachers knew about the subject. When I came across somebody who genuinely loved it and was able to piece together events from different periods, not just about the work around the Boer War, but actually the history of South Africa and how and its place in the empire and what actually, why it was valuable to the empire and all this sort of stuff, And Dave was just a brilliant teacher, and he went off, trained to be a teacher, went back to that school, and stayed his entire teaching career teaching history at that school. He attended my wedding, our wedding, and I still get Christmas cards, and I send Christmas cards to Dave. And you know, he is the reason I became a teacher. And if he hadn't had that year off, you know, I probably would have ended up not going onto the Ford's line, which is what my father wanted me to do, but probably would have ended up doing some, you know, a job in a bank or something like that. So I owe it a lot to Dave Milne, and I'm grateful for it. So
on that basis, I'll just mention two. I was when I was at grammar school, and I got into the second year, I was already sliding down that, you know, couldn't be bothered doing work, didn't matter, nobody seemed to worry. And I had a maths teacher who, on the first set of homework, collected the books in, and then when he distributed them, there was a group of about 4 books that he kept on one side, and one of them was mine. And it was not good enough. Presentation wasn't good enough. You haven't done what I've asked you to do. And he said, right, these 4, every homework, I want those 4 books collected in, and I'm going to check them. And I was actually good at maths, but I was definitely at a point where that would have just slid away because of my attitude that was growing at that point. And he, I think, saved my time at school, because he wasn't nasty, he was just thorough and didn't let anything go at all. So by the 3rd time he'd seen my homework and knew I was pretty good at maths and it was okay, he still didn't let go.
yeah,
He still kept on checking.
I can't recall Dave Milne ever shouting or losing his rag. He was always in control, and because he had something, Stan, that we all knew, he knew a lot, and the way he sold it to us, we just lapped it up. You know, suddenly more kids were interested in history. I then became interested in politics because of that. You know, all of this spun out of that, just that one good teacher, you know, and he cared for us, but I got a feeling, even though he didn't treat me any differently, I think, to anybody else, but I felt as though he was treating me as a special person, you know, a bit like your teacher.
Yeah, well, I think right to the end of while I was at the grammar school in the final year, where all the standards had kind of dropped because it was changing into a comprehensive, so uniform was less.
Yeah.
All those, you can see the slide. Some of the teachers had already gone off to teach in the 6th form, and it was on its way down. But even in that last few weeks, when he came into the classroom, if you didn't all stand up, as we'd always had to do, he would stand at the door until everybody did stand. Didn't shout. He just wait until everybody was. He actually lived not far from me, and I really, really regret not going and seeing him while he was still alive.
Well, on World Teacher Day, perhaps we all ought to reach out to a teacher that has made a difference to us before they have all slipped away. Anyway,
there, Frank, about subject knowledge, deep subject knowledge,
yes.
And there's so much stuff now about teaching techniques and what they call the science of learning. But if you don't know anything,
you've got nothing to
teach. So deep subject knowledge, I think, linked to a passion for the subject. Those are the other bits you could sort of.
Yeah, those are the building blocks, aren't they, of that?
Yes.
Yeah. That
and as a child and as a student, you can recognise that immediately.
Straight away.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's no question about it. You know, oh right, this person knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, they know their stuff, then worth listening to. And next thing you know, you're loving the subject.
Yeah. Now I'm going to bring it to a close because that's 45 minutes.
Okay. Well,
isn't that amazing? Where did that go? But Pie, thank you so much for your time today. Are you working on a book at the moment?
I'm literally
He's always working on a book.
I literally have one published today.
Oh, wow. Oh, gosh. What's it called? Hold it. Inspiring Creative Writers.
Inspiring Creative Writers. Yeah.
Stan, is that going to modify the... Were you aware of that book?
You could have that on the end, Frank. I could send you.
Will you add it on the end? We'll add it on the end there, Pie.
There's no room on the front cover for any more books.
I know when you look at this cover sheet, Pie, you can barely work out the heads in it. There's just so many books around it.
I've just kept at it. I've just had a sort of ruthless determination that it sound like something out of Monty Python. We lived in a shoe bag in middle of road. We did start off life in a 2 up, 2 down, and when there was a tin tub in the backyard, and of course, like so many people, the toilet was at the end of the yard. It was shilling in the meter or whatever it was, and actually, first, I don't know, must have been 5 or 6 years. We weren't on mains water, so I can remember going over the road with this dirty great bucket that was almost as big as me, helping Mum pull. There was a pump.
Yes.
And you pumped your water and then went back over with the bucket, etc. So our early times came out of, I mean, it was just home, but it was extreme poverty, and it was quite hard, and yet we had story, as my dad was part Irish, and story was important. So
yes.
Mum and Dad gave us all I knew all the nursery rhymes. A rhyme is for free. Dad told stories. On the way to school, he'd give you the first half of the story, and on the way back, you got the second half. There was endless chatter, lots and lots of talk. And of course, in those days, you could play outside. So there was a lot of play going on. But it was a poor background. And I think Mum had learned from probably Woman's Hour or something. Do you remember on the radio? There was, probably still goes on.
It still goes on, yeah.
Yeah, it still goes on. I think she picked up from there that you had to read to your children. So we were read to every night, come what may, even if there'd been a bit of a to-do, we were read to. And that, I think I could say that because they read to them, we were taken to the library. And because we read to them, because we had story, I think that's why I'm sitting here.
Right.
And so my sort of career has been really about, I want every child to be able to read and write and have a good cracking chance at life. And so that's the sort of background really in terms of what I think. I think story is incredibly important to us as human beings. If you look at every culture, at the heart of every culture is art, music, song, dance, religion, and story. Story is fundamental to human beings. It's what we're doing now.
Yes.
We're sitting around
telling stories.
Stories about teaching and the things we're passionate about. And story is one thing I think that actually potentially binds humanity together, because every single culture has its stories. But of course, the stories are all echoes of each other, because all the stories are about human beings, and we may look different and live in different places, but we are all just human beings. I think the power of story is underestimated in schools, and I see a lot of teaching of grammar, and we all know why, because if you test kids on something, that's what teachers are going to do. And so I've often said to people, you'd be mad not to, in a way, wouldn't you? Why would you foolishly decide you weren't going to do grammar when you know there's a test on it? So there is the other part of it, of course, that in terms of the grammar, I do think kids should know what an adjective is. I think they need to know the fundamentals.
Yeah, and I agree, because I struggled, because I didn't have that when it came around to foreign languages.
Yes.
It's coping with the grammar and the foreign language.
Yes.
Anyway, I'm going to have to stop you, because
yes,
what will happen is
one thing, Frank, when we're talking about songs and rhymes, I took my grandson out to the local garden place, and he was running over a hump in the children's playground, and he was singing the Grand Old Duke of York as he went up, and but it was actually the granddad Duke of York.
Love it.
Right. Well, Pie, thank you so much for fascinating chat. And yeah, it's we'd love to have you back next year. I'll reach out to you again if you're up for
I
it.
do. Yeah, I've enjoyed
Yeah,
chatting.
really enjoyed it. And
Yeah.
for everybody, we're back again next week. Another guest will be joining us, and we'll got a few weeks before we hit the summer break. So we'll keep going right to the end. So we'll see you all next week. Until then, take care, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Hi, everyone.